Association for Community Action. We are the state association that works with the community action agencies across the state. And what the community action agencies do is they provide a wide array of services to people who are low income. And they serve people in all 169 cities and towns across the state. I've submitted testimony today in support of Senate Bill 1053, an act establishing a task force to study and make recommendations concerning the elderly nutrition program. And I'll just summarize my testimony. And I also wanted to add a few comments based on Commissioner Porter's testimony as well. I know that this committee and all of the policymakers in our state support the Meals on Wheels program and recognize the value of helping people to age in place by bringing nutritious food to their homes. Another valuable aspect of this program is that when the meals are dropped off, it's like a check-in. You know, the person who's bringing the meal gets to speak with the person who's receiving it, ask how they're doing, ask if they have any additional needs. And it serves as a great way to check in daily with people who often don't have any other interaction socially. The program is growing because our aging population is growing. People are getting older, are living longer, and also because we have made a concerted effort in Connecticut to help people age in their communities instead of going into nursing homes. And part of helping people age in their communities is being able to ensure that they can afford an appropriate place to live and that they can afford to pay for food or have food brought to them. They can pay utilities and all of those things. But unfortunately, the Meals on Wheels program and elderly nutrition has not kept pace as far as the funding that's going towards those programs with the increased need. Moreover, we've seen escalating costs for all of the cost drivers for this program. 3 major cost drivers. Food has gone way up. Labor costs have gone way up. And gasoline went way up. It's kind of down. It's kind of it's on a little bit of a wave. But we know that we need more funding in order to make this program work and to ensure that it can work for today, but also looking ahead to the future to make sure that this program works. I want to address a comment that, or discussion that happened with Commissioner Porter, where she indicated that this particular task force isn't needed because we already have some policy committees working on this. And I will agree with that. We may or may not need this particular task force. What the task force looks like, what it's called, where it sits may not be as important as who sits on that task force and what their goals are. And so to that point, we're happy to work with all of you and to work with the Department of Aging and Disability Services, but we really need to get to the root of what's happening with this program and figure out how to make sure it's funded adequately across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. That was perfect timing within the 3 minutes allotted. Question though, what is happening on the ground with the community action agencies and elderly nutrition funding? We're hearing that some seem to be able to provide nutrition services within their allotted funds and others aren't. And does that seem to vary depending on which area agency on aging they're located in? What's happening on the ground?
Yeah, and thank you for that question and the opportunity to talk a little bit about that. So we have 4 community action agencies that are providing Meals on Wheels, and they are funded through different area agencies on aging. And we're trying to figure out why this is the case, but it does appear that some of the area agencies on aging have adequate funding that's being passed through to the community action agencies, and they're able to provide the same level of service that they've been providing, whereas others do not. And so what we're seeing is, and I think there's testimony from New Opportunities that they've had to reduce services to their Meals on Wheels clients. First, they dropped from 7 meals a week to 5, and now they've most recently dropped from 5 to 4. We know that the Community Renewal Team, which has a really large geographic area in Connecticut, gets funding from 2 different area agencies on aging, and in most of its area it seems fine, but for the Middletown area, your area, Senator Lesser, it does need to install an enrollment cap for Meals on Wheels, unfortunately, and also look to reduce meals. And so people are feeling the impact of the funding. It's unclear whether it's just inadequate funding or whether it's just not allocated in a way that really serves the needs of the people in Connecticut.
And you don't have any explanation for why that may be going on or what's happening?
Yeah, we're not really sure, and that's why we need your assistance to try to get down and figure out where the funding is coming from, where the funding is going to, why it's going in that particular formula, what happens between the area agencies on aging and all of the elderly nutrition providers, not just the community action agencies, but all of them. And we're just having trouble kind of sussing out what's happening and why some areas of the state are fine and others aren't.
That sounds like a great project for our nonpartisan staff to reach out to the area agencies on aging, and because we asked the question of Commissioner Porter in a budget hearing recently, and she said she wasn't withholding funding, so we're puzzled. It doesn't. Everybody seems to be pointing in different directions, but I don't. Love to hear what the agencies have to say.
Yeah, and if I could just comment, we are also asking not this committee, but the Appropriations Committee, which many of you sit on, for additional funding for this program. The vast majority of the funding does come from the federal government, but the state does put some funding in, and we're asking for additional funds.
Great. Thank you very much. Senator Seminara, followed by Representative Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you so much for what you do. I have received recently some calls within my district claiming that the amount of food they're receiving has been significant, not necessarily the meals, but the amount of food within the meals that they're getting has been reduced. And I was wondering if you are aware of that, if that might be happening because a result of the price of food, and so I just wondered if you were aware of that and if you had any information on that at all.
I don't know. Thank you, Senator Seminara, for that question. I don't know whether that's the case, although it makes sense to me that if you're trying to stretch your dollar, you might end up putting a little bit less food in each meal, but I will look into that and I will follow up with you.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Deb. Great
Hi.
to see you.
Good to see you, too.
So I was listening to you. So did you say you did or did not support the task force?
We support this task force, but we also are completely willing to work with you, work with the department on a different task force or beefing up an existing task force. Like, we don't really care that much if it's brand new or if it's a reconstructed version of an existing task force.
And are you all involved with the stakeholders meetings?
I personally just found out about those a couple of weeks ago and attended my first one just, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. And I do think that there are some community action agencies who have been participating in those stakeholders meetings.
So I think that's really important too. Like if we have stakeholders and you all are involved in the same conversation, that all the stakeholders should be around the table to figure out some of this situation as well. And I'm not sure, and I know you've been sitting in here for quite some time, but I'm not sure if you heard what I said earlier about members of the stakeholders group that were frustrated, feeling that it was only geared towards certain things and it really wasn't about all of the things that they needed to be about. And that was why they supported the task force. And they felt that the stakeholders meeting was to push certain agendas, but not really the overall concept of what all of the agencies were really looking for. Something you could get behind?
I did hear you say that. I was still watching from home at that point, though, Representative Cook. I think, yes, if there is a more transparent process as far as what agenda items the stakeholders group looks at, how it does so, and what the goals are, that would be great.
So, and I think the other issue that, and I know the good senator asked you a question about why there was such a disparity between needs, and part of that issue was addressed over the last couple of years, and that is why we did add some things on the Form 5 about really getting some information regarding dollars and cents and where they went and how it was being spent. But the other issue too is when we talk about the northwest corner or the northeast corner, and you are in such sparse rural lands, it's going to take you maybe 45 minutes to get from one person to another person, to where if you're in the corridor on 84, for example, you can get to 15 people in 5 minutes. And so the reimbursements are not given accordingly to location. They're given accordingly to organization, and then some are still not equally distributed accordingly. And so we've been trying to balance that out over the last several years, and there's some very territorial opinions on this, but I do believe that the only thing that we should be worried about when it comes to territory is the folks that we're supposed to be providing meals for. And we must do better with what we are doing. I think the folks on the ground are doing yeoman's work with what they have. They're needing $2 million, and I think that we need to really figure out how to give them $2 million. Because as we have heard in various committees, food insecurity is a health crisis, and food deserts are health crisis. And so if you are resulting in something from a convenience store, no disrespect to convenience stores, and that's what you're considering a meal, that is not a healthy meal. We know we've been raised with the fact that we need the food groups, and it's imperative that we get our vitamins and our nutrients and all of the things. And if we can't provide that, we're just going to create more health situations further down the line, and somewhat severe of what we don't need to do. And we know that the older we get, the more difficult it is for us to absorb those nutrients anyway, or if you have medical conditions. So I think that $2 million to offset what could be many, many more millions in health issues and other things is the least that we can do in this situation. So thank you for what you guys do.
Yeah, thank you. And just to comment on the rural aspect, I mean, that is absolutely true, that if you think about you're delivering 10 meals, and if you're in maybe the city of Bridgeport or the city of Hartford, you can get those 10 meals delivered usually pretty rapidly. But if you're traveling around the northeast or the northwest corner of the state, it could take a while. And we do know that those areas are also food deserts. And particularly for people who are homebound or mostly homebound, it's so important to bring a nutritious meal right to the door.
And then in closing, I think it's also important to say that emphasize what you said about dropping off those Meals on Wheels is really a home check, right? And that might be the only contact with somebody that you have for 2 days. And Meals on Wheels used to be able to go to your home every day. And now most of them are doing double or triple meals, and so they only go out twice a week maybe. And you're putting things in a refrigerator or a freezer. And I'm not saying that those are bad meals, and that's not what I'm saying at all, but 24 to 48 hours could be a long time if somebody really needs that wellness check. So it's dual purpose. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions for Ms. Polun? Seeing none, you're off the hook.
Thank you.